Why are you being so selfish, Emma? They're your family now too. That's what my dad shouted at me last Sunday, his voice echoing through the small kitchen of the house I grew up in. The words hit harder than I expected, probably because I'd been bracing myself for this conversation ever since he remarried. Still, hearing him say it out loud, hearing that tone felt like someone had just stepped on everything I'd been quietly building for years. I didn't yell back. I rarely do. Instead, I just stared at him, my fingers tightening around the coffee mug until I could feel the ceramic heat burning my palm. His new wife Claire stood beside him, her hand resting gently on his arm like she was the reasonable one holding him back from an argument. Her 2 kids, Mason and Lily, hovered awkwardly in the hallway, pretending not to listen, but everyone knew they were. This wasn't how I'd imagined family reunions going. When my dad first told me he was remarrying, I genuinely wanted to be happy for him. He'd been lonely after Mum passed away, and although our relationship had grown distant over the years, I still cared about his happiness. So I congratulated him, bought him a modest gift, and told myself I'd give his new wife a fair chance. But things changed the moment money entered the conversation. I make good money in a career I built from scratch, fueled by long nights, endless study sessions, and the kind of loneliness that hardens you. A few years ago, when my younger siblings, Ryan and Sophie, were still in high school, I promised them I'd help pay for their college tuition. It wasn't a casual offer. I started a dedicated savings fund, automatic transfers every month, cutting down on my own comforts so they wouldn't have to carry the same financial burdens I once did. Ryan's face had lit up that day. Sophie cried and hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. I still remember that moment, the hope in their eyes, the relief that maybe life wouldn't crush them the way it had nearly crushed me. It was one of the few times I felt like I was doing something that mattered, but now my dad wants me to divide that same fund for ways between Ryan, Sophie, and his new stepchildren. It's only fair, he said, as though fairness could be measured in dollars. As though a promise made years ago could be rewritten to accommodate the family he decided to rebuild. Claire chimed in gently, her voice sugar-coated but sharp underneath. Love makes a family, Emma. You can't exclude Mason and Lily just because they're not your blood. I wanted to laugh, but it came out more like a sigh. Love makes a family, that's what she said. But where was that love when I was working overtime to keep the lights on after Mum's medical bills piled up? Where was that love when my dad drifted away, too lost in his grief to notice we were barely holding it together? Now, suddenly, I'm the villain for setting boundaries. Ryan hasn't spoken much since that fight. Sophie, on the other hand, called me crying, terrified that she might lose her chance to go to the art school she's dreamed about since she was 10. She asked me if Dad could really make me split the money. I told her no, not legally, but emotionally. That's a different kind of weight. I've always believed in fairness, but I also believe in promises, and the ones I made to my siblings weren't up for negotiation. Still, the guilt lingers, thick and unshakable. Every time I close my eyes, I hear my dad's words again. You're punishing them just because they're not blood. Maybe he's right. Or maybe, for once, I'm just protecting what's left of the family I actually grew up with. Either way, this fight isn't over. I can feel it. The tension in our house now has a pulse, slow but steady, waiting for the next word to break it completely. The next morning, I woke up to a flood of messages. 1 from my dad, 3 from Claire, and a string of texts from Sophie, her words, a mix of panic and anger. Dad told Mason and Lily about the college fund, she wrote. They think you're paying for everyone now. I sat on the edge of my bed, phone in hand, feeling my chest tighten. It wasn't just disappointment, anymore it was disbelief. I had told my dad, clearly, that the fund was for Ryan and Sophie only. He had nodded, even thanked me once for stepping up in ways he couldn't, but now, it felt like all of that had vanished overnight, rewritten into some twisted version of generosity that suited his new family better. I didn't respond right away. I got up, brewed coffee, and tried to steady my breathing. The sunlight spilling through my apartment blinds felt too bright, too warm for a morning that already felt so heavy. My savings account tab was still open on my laptop. $96,200. That number had taken me almost 5 years to build. Every raise, every bonus, every skipped vacation had contributed to it. And now, just because my father had remarried, I was expected to slice it apart. Claire's text came next. I know this is hard for you, but Mason and Lily deserve a fair chance too. They're good kids, and they already see you as a big sister. I hope you'll do the right thing. The right thing. I stared at that phrase for a long time. It amazed me how easily people used it when they wanted something from you. I typed a reply. I made a promise to Ryan and Sophie years ago. This money is theirs. Then I deleted it. I knew anything I said would just fuel the fire. By the afternoon, Dad called again. His voice was calm this time, too calm, like he'd rehearsed what to say. Emma, you're making this harder than it has to be, he began. They're part of the family now. If you care about your siblings, you'll set an example of kindness. Kindness? I asked quietly. Is that what this is about? Or is it about you wanting to look good in front of your new wife? Silence, then a long exhale. You're being cruel, he said finally. You think money defines love. I almost laughed, but there was nothing funny about it. No, Dad. I think promises do. That was the last thing I said before hanging up. For days after, the tension became something I could feel, a physical ache in my chest every time my phone buzzed. Ryan stopped replying to our group chat entirely. Sophie's messages were shorter now, more careful, as if she was afraid to say the wrong thing. And then, one night, Mum's old photo fell off my dresser. I don't believe in signs, but that night, staring at the shattered glass, I thought about what she'd say if she were here. Mum always told me to stay true to my word, even if it cost me. People forget what you say, Em, she used to whisper when I was a kid. But they remember what you keep, so I decided to keep my promise. I drafted a letter that evening, nothing emotional, just practical. I explained to my father that the money had always been for Ryan and Sophie, that I would transfer it directly into an education trust for them and close the account afterward. I said I hoped Mason and Lily would have opportunities too, but I couldn't take away from the commitment I made years before. I didn't expect gratitude. I didn't even expect understanding. I just needed to say it clearly one final time. When I dropped the letter in the mailbox, my hands were shaking. It wasn't fear, exactly, it was something heavier. Like guilt and relief had merged into one emotion I couldn't name. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept wondering if I was becoming the villain in someone else's story, the cold, detached stepsister who refused to share. Maybe that's how Mason and Lily would remember me. Maybe that's how my dad already did. But I also knew this. Sometimes doing the right thing for yourself makes everyone else think you're doing the wrong thing. And you have to live with that still. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. People like Claire didn't give up easily, and my father, well, he hated losing, especially when it came to control. Somewhere deep down, I could feel the next storm brewing. I just didn't know how big it would be or who it would take down with it. 3 days later, the storm arrived, not as yelling, but as silence. When I went to visit my dad's house that weekend, the air felt different the moment I stepped in. The photos on the hallway wall had changed. Old family pictures were replaced with newer ones. Dad, Claire, Mason, and Lily smiling in matching sweaters. The photo of Ryan, Sophie, and me at the lake, the one Mum took the summer before she passed, was gone. Claire greeted me at the door with a smile so polished it looked practiced. "Emma, we weren't sure you'd come," she said, her voice soft but laced with something else. "Dinner's almost ready." I forced a polite smile and walked in. The house smelled different to rosemary and lemon candles instead of Dad's usual burnt coffee and motor oil. Everything about it felt staged, like I'd walked into someone else's life. Ryan and Sophie were sitting quietly at the table. Ryan barely looked up. Sophie gave me a quick, worried glance. Dad sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable. "We need to talk," he said simply. I took a seat, trying to steady my breathing. "About what?" He folded his hands. "About fairness." There it was, that word again, fairness. I almost laughed from how absurd it sounded. Now Claire placed a hand on his arm. "We just want everyone to feel included," she said softly. "The kids have been so hurt since they found out you didn't consider them part of your plans. They really look up to you, Emma." I looked at Mason and Lily. They were polite, quiet, but the resentment in their eyes was unmistakable, and I couldn't blame them completely. They were just repeating what they'd been told. Dad sighed heavily. "I can't believe you'd put your siblings through this kind of tension. Ryan and Sophie are fighting now because of you. This isn't what your mother would have wanted." My stomach turned. Using Mum's name like that, it felt cruel. "Don't bring Mum into this," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. "She would have wanted me to keep my promises." He shook his head. "She would have wanted you to be compassionate." I clenched my jaw. Compassion isn't the same as surrender. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Claire leaned forward. "Emma," she said gently, "you make good money. You could easily start another fund, couldn't you? It's not like this would ruin you." It was the kind of comment that sounds harmless until you realize how deeply it cuts. The implication was clear, that my work, my sacrifices, my late nights meant nothing, that money was just there, waiting to be given away. I took a deep breath. "You're right, Claire," I said slowly. "I could make more money, but I can't make more trust. And once it's gone, it doesn't come back." Dad frowned. "You're twisting this into something ugly." "Maybe it's been ugly all along," I whispered. Dinner passed in uncomfortable silence after that. The sound of clinking silverware felt deafening. Mason barely touched his food. Sophie kept her head down. Ryan stared at me like I'd betrayed him somehow, though I couldn't tell if it was because of what I'd done or because I hadn't done enough. When I stood up to leave, Dad didn't stop me. He just said, "You're making a mistake you'll regret." I nodded. "Maybe, but at least it'll be mine." Outside, the night air was sharp, colder than it should have been for early autumn. I sat in my car for a long time, gripping the steering wheel and staring at the porch light. Through the window, I could see them, the new family. 4 silhouettes at the table, together. My siblings sitting apart like guests in their own home. That image stayed with me the whole drive back, not because it hurt, but because it confirmed something I hadn't wanted to admit. I was no longer part of that family. Not really. When I got home, I found a voicemail from Sophie. Her voice cracked as she spoke. "Emma, I don't know what to do. Dad says if you won't help Mason and Lily, he might just take some of the money himself. He said he has a right to it because you owe the family. Please call me." My hands went cold. He couldn't actually touch the money, not legally. The account was in my name alone. But the fact that he would threaten to, that was different. That was a betrayal I hadn't seen coming. For the first time, I felt something shift inside me. Not sadness, not guilt, but anger. Slow, deliberate, and precise. The kind that doesn't explode, but focuses. If he wanted a war over family, I'd give him one. But it wouldn't be about money anymore. It would be about respect, about finally drawing a line that no one could cross again. I turned off my phone and sat there in silence, the city lights flickering outside my window. Somewhere deep inside, I could almost hear Mum's voice again, soft but firm. "Don't let them rewrite your promise, Em. You already kept it once. Keep it again." I didn't know what I would do next, not yet. But I knew one thing for certain. The next time my father looked at me and called me selfish, I wouldn't flinch. The next week felt like walking on glass. Every vibration from my phone made my stomach twist. I stopped checking the family group chat altogether. It had turned into a battlefield of passive-aggressive messages and quiet blame. Claire's name appeared the most. Little reminders disguised as kindness. "Mason is applying to colleges soon. I'm sure we can count on your help." I ignored them. But ignoring didn't make the noise stop then. One afternoon, Sophie called me again. Her voice was shaky, like she'd been crying for hours. "Dad took Mason to the bank," she said quietly. "He tried to find out what account the college money is in." My heart stopped. "What?" he said. "It's family money," Sophie whispered. "He told the banker that he has partial claim since you're his daughter and it's meant for the family's education fund." I could feel the heat rise in my chest. That phrase, family money, made me sick. My father had never contributed a single dollar to that fund. Not one. I thanked Sophie, hung up, and immediately called my bank. Thankfully, they confirmed what I already knew. No one could access it but me. Still, the fact that he'd even tried, it was something I couldn't ignore anymore. That night, I sat down with my laptop and opened a new document. For the first time, I started putting everything in writing: dates, account records, text messages. Not because I planned to sue my father, but because I needed to protect myself. I'd spent years cleaning up after his impulsive decisions, from unpaid bills to forgotten promises. But this was different. This was him crossing into my life, my independence, the one thing I'd built on my own. Ryan texted me later that night. "You're tearing this family apart, Em." I stared at the message for a long time before replying, "No, I'm just refusing to let someone else tear me apart." He didn't answer. By Friday, I decided to drive back to my hometown. Not to argue, not to negotiate, but to end this once and for all. The road felt endless, each mile giving me too much time to think. The farther I got from the city, the heavier my chest felt, as though I was carrying every conversation, every accusation, every whispered guilt with me when I finally pulled into the driveway. I saw Dad in the garage, tinkering with his old motorcycle. He looked up, startled, then sighed. "Emma," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "Didn't expect to see you." I stepped closer. "We need to talk." He nodded slowly, gesturing toward the workbench. "Then talk." I took a deep breath. "You tried to access my account." His jaw tightened. "I just wanted to understand what's going on. You've made everything so secretive." "It's not secretive," I said sharply. "It's private, and you don't have the right to touch it. That money isn't yours." His eyes darkened. "You think I don't know that? I just wanted to make sure everyone's treated fairly." "Mason and Lily are not my responsibility," I interrupted. My voice trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of finally saying what I'd been holding back. "I made a promise to Ryan and Sophie years ago. Before you met Claire, before any of this. I've worked for that money, Dad, every cent of it. And I won't let you guilt me into rewriting my own promises just to make your new family happy." He stared at me, silent for a long moment. Then, in a tone that almost broke me, he said, "You sound just like your mother." Something inside me cracked, not from pain, but from memory, because I knew what that meant. Mum was the only person who ever stood up to him, who refused to bend just to keep the peace. She loved him deeply, but she never let him confuse love with obedience. "Good," I said quietly. "That means I'm doing something right." He looked away, his mouth tightening. "You've changed, Emma." "I had to," I said. "You stopped protecting us a long time ago. Someone had to." The silence that followed felt final, heavy like the closing of a door that had been cracked open for too long. I turned to leave, but before I reached the car, I heard him call after me. "I just wanted us all to be one family," he said, his voice softer now. "I thought you wanted that too." I paused, my hand on the car door. "I did," I said, my throat tight. "But I learned something, Dad. Love doesn't demand debt. It doesn't erase promises. It just asks for honesty. And you haven't been honest with me since you met her." He didn't reply. The drive back felt lighter somehow, even though my chest ached. For the first time, I wasn't replaying arguments in my head, or trying to find the right words to fix things. I'd already said them. There was nothing left to fix. When I got home, I logged into my savings account and transferred the full amount, half to a trust for Ryan, half for Sophie. It wasn't about punishing anyone. It was about closing a chapter, about finishing what I started. Then I sent my dad one last text. "The money is where it was always meant to be. Please don't contact me about it again." No reply came that night, but I didn't need one. For the first time in months, I slept without dreams. No guilt, no anxiety, just quiet. A fragile kind of peace. Still, deep down, I knew this wasn't truly over. Not with people like Claire involved. Not with the way my father hated losing control. The calm never lasted long in our family. It was only ever the pause before the next wave, and I could already feel it coming. The calm lasted less than a week. It began with an email from Claire. Not a message or a call, an email, formal and cold. Like a letter from someone pretending to be polite while twisting the knife. She wrote about family unity, shared responsibility, and the importance of setting an example. Her words were smooth, but every sentence carried the same accusation that I had damaged the family bond by prioritizing individual promises over collective love. At the end, she added a single line that made my stomach turn. If you truly cared about Mason and Lily's future, you'd reconsider before they start to resent you for abandoning them. Abandoning them. As if I'd been some kind of mother figure they were entitled to. As if I owed them something because my father made a choice to remarry. I didn't reply. I didn't even forward it to Dad. I simply archived it. But the words stayed with me, whispering in the back of my mind through the following days. That weekend, Sophie came to visit. She arrived at my apartment, carrying a small duffel bag and a tired smile. "I needed a break from that house," she said, dropping onto my couch. "Dad barely talks to me. Claire's pretending to be sweet, but it's like walking through glass." I poured her tea and sat beside her. "How's Ryan?" She hesitated. "Angry, mostly at Dad. A little at you, I think. He says you should have just given in, that it wasn't worth all this." I nodded slowly. "Maybe he's right." She looked up sharply. "No, Em, you did the right thing." The conviction in her voice startled me. She took a deep breath before continuing. "I used to think love meant saying yes. That being kind meant giving up pieces of yourself to make other people happy. But watching you, I realized boundaries don't mean you love less. They mean you finally learn to love yourself too." I didn't say anything at first. I just stared at her. My little sister, who used to cry when Dad forgot her school plays, who used to apologize for taking up space. She looked older now, stronger. Maybe pain does that. She smiled faintly. Mum would have been proud. That night, after she went to bed, I found myself sitting on the balcony, watching the city lights blink in the distance. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel angry, just sad. Sad for what could have been. For the version of our family that might have survived if my dad had tried to understand instead of control. 2 days later, Dad called. I almost didn't answer, but something in me, maybe habit, maybe hope, made me swipe the screen. His voice was quiet, uncertain. "Emma, I read your message. About the trust funds. I figured you did," I said carefully. A pause. "Then, I'm sorry." I froze. It wasn't something my father said often. For what? For trying to fix things with money that wasn't mine to fix, he said slowly. I thought, maybe if everyone shared, it would make us feel like one family. But I guess I was forcing something that wasn't ready to exist yet. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I could hear his breathing on the other end, rough and uneven. "I don't hate you, Dad," I said finally. "I just needed you to respect me. That's all I ever wanted." "I know," he whispered. "I just didn't know how." We talked for a while, cautiously, like strangers learning each other's language again. He didn't mention Claire much, and I didn't ask. There were some things better left in silence. When the call ended, I sat quietly, staring at my reflection in the darkened window. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't even feel relieved. Just lighter, like something had finally loosened its grip around my chest. In the weeks that followed, things slowly settled. Dad kept his distance, but his tone softened. Ryan eventually texted me to apologize, admitting he'd been scared more than angry. Sophie thrived. She got into her dream art school, her laughter sounding freer than it had in years. As for Mason and Lily, I never heard from them directly. But one day, Claire sent a short message, only 2 sentences. "I still think you're wrong, but I can see you're not cruel. Let's agree to keep things civil." That was the closest thing to peace I'd get, and honestly, it was enough. Months passed. Life found its rhythm again. Work, friends, quiet evenings. The savings account was closed, the trusts active. Every so often, when I checked their balances, I smiled. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about meaning, about promises kept even when it hurt, sometimes. Though, when I think about that kitchen argument, my dad's voice breaking, Claire's careful tone, Ryan's silence, I wonder if there's ever a truly fair way to divide love. Maybe there isn't. Maybe love isn't meant to be divided at all, only given where it was promised. And as I stood one night looking out over the city, the wind cold against my skin, I whispered softly, maybe to Mom, maybe to myself I kept my promise, because in the end, that was all I ever wanted, to keep one thing pure, untouched by guilt or expectation. To remind myself that fairness isn't always about equality. Sometimes, it's about remembering who you made the promise to, and keeping it even when no one else understands.